The dress was the color of ripe wheat. Daisy had spent 3 weeks sewing every stitch by hand, working by candlelight that melted faster than her fingers could move. The loom had been broken for months, so she had done everything herself. The simple cut, the modest neckline, the small embroidered detail along the hem that no one would probably notice but that she had placed there anyway, because it mattered to her. A tiny wolf flower, stitched in golden thread. Her mother had taught her that pattern before she died, and Daisy carried it the way she carried most things, quietly, close to her chest, without asking anyone else to hold the weight. She stood at the entrance of Ashford Hall and breathed in slowly. The great hall smelled of burning resin, roasted meat, spiced wine, and leather. Torches lined the stone walls in long rows, casting everything in amber and shadow. The banners of 7 packs hung from the rafters, deep crimson, forest green, coal black, swaying gently in the warm air that rose from the hearths below. Long oak tables stretched across the floor, already crowded with wolves in their finest. Laughter rolled through the space in waves. Someone was playing a stringed instrument in the corner, the melody low and celebratory. It was the night of claiming, the most important gathering in the pack calendar. Once a year, the Alpha of Ashford Pack stood before his people and made his formal declaration, who he had chosen to stand beside him, who he intended to call his own. It was tradition older than the hall itself, older than the stone walls and the carved wolf heads above the great doors. And this year, for the first time in Daisy's 23 years of life, she had been invited to attend not as a servant refilling wine cups, but as a guest. Because Caden had asked her to come. Caden, son of Elder Rowan. Caden, who had spent the last 4 months walking her home from the grain market, bringing her dried herbs when she had a cold, telling her in his low, careful voice that she was different from other women, that he saw her, that when the night of claiming came, she would understand exactly what he meant. Daisy had believed him. She wasn't naive. She knew what her position was in Ashford. No pack name, no alpha blood, no land. Her father had been a wandering beta who died before she was old enough to remember his face, and her mother had been a gentlewoman with healer's hands and no political standing. Daisy had grown up on the edge of the pack, neither cast out nor truly welcomed in, existing in the careful, in-between space that the powerless learn to inhabit. She knew what she was. She also knew what she felt when Caden looked at her, or what she had thought she felt. She moved through the crowd carefully, her wheat-colored dress catching the torchlight in a way that made the golden embroidery at the hem shimmer. A few wolves glanced at her. Most looked away. She was used to that. She found a place near the second pillar, close enough to see the raised dais at the front of the hall where the Alpha's declaration would be made, and she waited. Her best friend Petra appeared at her elbow within minutes, breathless and bright-eyed, her dark curls pinned up with a bone clasp. "You look beautiful," Petra said immediately, squeezing Daisy's arm. "That dress. Did you finish the hem detail?" "Last night." Daisy smiled, and it was a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "I think it turned out well." "It's perfect." Petra leaned close. "Have you seen him yet?" Daisy shook her head. "Not yet. He was near the east corridor earlier. He looked—" Petra paused, choosing her words. "He looked like someone who knows what he's about to do." Daisy nodded and said nothing. Her hands were folded in front of her, still and calm. Inside, something was moving. Not quite hope, not quite fear. Something in between. That particular feeling of standing on a threshold without knowing what the room behind the door contained. The drums began. 3 low, resonant strikes. The hall quieted almost instantly, the laughter fading to murmurs, and then to silence. At the front of the room, Elder Rowan ascended the dais steps slowly, his ceremonial mane across his shoulders, his expression solemn and proud. Behind him came the ranked wolves of Ashford, betas, enforcers, the inner circle, and then Caden. Daisy watched him climb those steps and felt something tighten in her chest. He was handsome. She had always known that. Broad shoulders, dark hair, a clean jaw. He carried himself with the ease of someone who had never had to question his place in any room. He wore a deep green tunic tonight, edged in bronze, and a silver clasp at his collar. He looked like exactly what he was. The son of an elder, a man of standing, a wolf who had choices. Elder Rowan raised one hand. People of Ashford. His voice carried easily through the silent hall. We gather on this night as we have gathered for generations, to witness, to honor, to bind. The traditional words. Daisy had heard them before, always from a distance, always while passing through with a tray of cups or a basket of bread. Tonight she stood still and let them land. My son Caden comes before you tonight to speak his claim. Elder Rowan stepped back. Let him be heard. Caden moved to the center of the dais. He was calm. He scanned the room with practiced ease, and for one moment, one brief, weightless moment, his eyes found Daisy near the second pillar. She held his gaze. He looked away. I claim Seraphine of the Dawnridge Pack, Caden said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Daughter of Alpha Gregor. I ask that she stand with me. The hall erupted. Applause, cheers, the stamping of boots on stone. From across the room, a young woman in ivory silk rose from her seat and moved toward the dais, her chin lifted, her expression composed and triumphant. Daisy did not move. She stood at the second pillar and felt the sound wash over her like cold water, the kind that doesn't just chill the skin, but goes deeper, into the place where things that were almost real live before they dissolve. The wolf flower on her hem. 3 weeks of candlelight. 4 months of walking home from the market. She understood, with perfect and terrible clarity, exactly what she was. She had never been the choice. She had been the practice. Petra's hand found her wrist. Daisy. I'm fine, Daisy said. Her voice was even. She was surprised by that. I just need some air. She moved before the applause had finished, threading through the crowd with her head level and her eyes forward, not running, not rushing, just walking with the steady quiet of someone who has decided that this room no longer contains anything she needs. The wheat-colored dress caught the torchlight one last time as she reached the side corridor, the golden thread at her hem catching the last amber glow before she stepped into the shadow. She had almost reached the outer doors when she heard it. Not applause. Not the celebration continuing behind her. Silence. A different kind of silence. The kind that falls when something, or someone, enters a space and reorders it simply by being present. Daisy stopped walking. Behind her, the great doors of Ashford Hall opened for the second time that night, and the cold air that swept through carried a scent she had never encountered before. Pine, dark earth, iron, and something older and deeper than all of those. Something that seemed to vibrate at a frequency she felt in her bones rather than her nose. She turned slowly. 3 men stood in the entrance of the hall. They were not from Ashford. That much was immediately clear. The wolves near the door had gone very still in the particular way that lower-ranked wolves go still when something significantly more powerful enters their territory. Not fear exactly, more like instinct, the body recognizing hierarchy before the mind can process it. The first man was broad and fair, with a grin already spreading across his face as he surveyed the room, clearly delighted by the effect his entrance was having. The second was lean and dark-eyed, his expression carrying the particular amused detachment of someone who finds most situations entertaining from a safe distance. The third stood between them, and slightly ahead. He was taller than the other 2, though not by much. What set him apart was not size, but stillness. While the fair one grinned and the dark-eyed one surveyed with irony, this one simply stood and looked, and the looking itself seemed to carry weight. He wore black leather and a dark fur mantle across shoulders that suggested a body built not for ceremony, but for actual use. His hair fell in long dark braids, and his eyes, even from across the hall, caught the torchlight and held it in a way that made them seem lit from within. Those eyes moved across the room with the unhurried patience of someone who has never needed to rush toward anything. And then they stopped. They stopped on Daisy. She was standing in the side corridor, half in shadow, in a wheat-colored dress with a wolf flower on the hem, and the most powerful wolf she had ever seen in her life was looking directly at her with an expression she could not name. Not pity. Not curiosity exactly. Recognition. As if he had been looking for something for a very long time, and had not expected to find it here, in a hallway, on a night that had just finished breaking her heart. Daisy did not smile. She did not look away either. She simply looked back at him, steady and still, the way her mother had taught her to face things that frightened her, without flinching, without pretending they weren't there. The fair man leaned toward the dark-eyed one and said something low that she couldn't hear. The dark-eyed one smiled. The one with the braids said nothing at all. He just kept looking at her, with that quiet, searching expression, as if her stillness in the middle of a breaking moment was the most interesting thing he had seen in a very long time. And somewhere deep in Daisy's chest, beneath the cold and the hurt and the careful composure she was holding together with both hands, something shifted, small and uncertain, like the first movement of something that had been still for too long. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know that he was Sebastian, Alpha King of the Northern Realm, Lord of Four Packs, the wolf that 7 other alphas deferred to without being asked. She only knew that he was looking at her, and that for reasons she could not yet explain, she did not want to be the first one to look away. Nobody moved to greet them. That was the thing Daisy noticed first, not the whispers spreading through the hall like fire catching dry wood, not the way Elder Rowan had descended 2 steps of the dais before stopping himself, not even the way Caden's newly claimed mate had gone very still in her ivory silk. What Daisy noticed was that not a single wolf in Ashford Hall moved toward the 3 men at the entrance to welcome them. Because you did not walk toward something like that. You waited. The fair one spoke first, his voice carrying easily across the silence, with the confidence of someone who enjoyed silence, mostly because of what he could do to it. We heard there was a celebration. He looked around the hall with genuine appreciation, taking in the banners, the torches, the long tables heavy with food and wine. We weren't invited, which I personally find offensive, but here we are regardless. A few wolves near the door made sounds that were not quite laughter, and not quite protest. The dark-eyed one beside him tilted his head slightly. "Dorian," he said, the single word carrying a quiet note of warning wrapped in amusement. "I'm just being honest, Rael." The fair one, Dorian, replied without looking at him. Sebastian said nothing. He had moved his eyes from Daisy the moment she had turned slightly away, and now he was looking at Elder Rowan with an expression of complete and impenetrable calm. Elder Rowan descended the remaining dais steps with the careful dignity of a man who understood that the political landscape of his hall had just changed considerably and was choosing to treat it as an ordinary evening anyway. "Alpha King." He inclined his head deeply. "We are honored by your presence. We were not informed of your intended visit." "No," Sebastian said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that did not need volume because it had never needed to compete with anything. "You weren't." A statement, not an apology. He offered nothing further. Elder Rowan absorbed this with practiced grace. "We are mid-ceremony. If you would permit us to conclude—" "Continue," Sebastian said simply. "We'll observe." It was not a request. But it was also not hostile. It was simply the natural register of a man who had long ago stopped distinguishing between the two. Because for him, there had never been a meaningful difference. Daisy had not left. She was not entirely sure why. She had been 3 steps from the outer corridor when the silence had fallen, and her feet had simply stopped cooperating. Now she stood at the edge of the hall, partially in shadow, watching the proceedings with the detached attention of someone who no longer has a personal stake in them and is therefore free to observe clearly. Petra had found her again and was standing close, her dark curls slightly disheveled, her expression cycling rapidly between concern for Daisy and barely concealed fascination with the 3 strangers. "That's him," Petra breathed near Daisy's ear. "That's actually him, Sebastian Vying, the Alpha King." Daisy filed the name away quietly. "The tall one with the braids?" she asked, though she already knew. "Yes, he controls the Northern Realm, all 4 territories. Even the mountain packs answer to him. I've never seen him this far south." Petra paused. "Nobody has, really. He doesn't make social visits." "Then why is he here?" Petra shook her head slowly. "I have absolutely no idea." The ceremony resumed with somewhat less enthusiasm than it had begun. Caden and his claimed mate completed the formal binding words. The elder spoke the traditional blessing, and the hall applauded again, though more carefully this time, with the self-conscious restraint of people who are aware they are being watched by someone whose opinion of their celebrations they cannot quite predict. Sebastian stood near the eastern wall with Dorian and Rael, and watched all of it with the patient, attentive stillness of a man who has learned that observation is almost always more useful than participation. Dorian leaned close to him at one point. "She's still here," he said under his breath, his grin audible even in a whisper. Sebastian did not respond. "The one in the wheat dress," Dorian continued, apparently undeterred by the lack of reaction. "Near the second pillar. She was the one standing in the corridor when we came in, the one you stared at for a rather notable length of time." "I was surveying the room," Sebastian said. "You were surveying her specifically." Rael, on Sebastian's other side, said nothing, but the slight curve of his mouth suggested he agreed with Dorian's assessment. Sebastian let the silence stand. It was a technique he had refined over many years, not denying, not confirming, simply allowing other people's observations to exist without giving them the satisfaction of a response. It worked on council members, on rival alphas, on anyone who needed information from him and would attempt to read absence of denial as confirmation. It worked on everyone except Dorian, who had known him since they were boys and was constitutionally immune to it. "She didn't flinch when we walked in," Dorian observed. "Everyone else either froze or pretended they hadn't noticed us, which is its own kind of freezing. She just looked, directly, like she was deciding something." "Most people decide things when they look," Sebastian said. "Not like that." Dorian was quiet for a moment. "She was in that corridor because something happened to her tonight. Something that should have made her want to leave, and she stayed." Sebastian's jaw moved slightly. It was the closest thing to a reaction he was going to offer. Across the hall, the celebration was loosening again, the initial tension of the stranger's arrival absorbing itself into the general warmth of wine and music as Ashford wolves gradually remembered that they were supposed to be enjoying themselves. The string player in the corner had resumed a livelier melody. Cups were being refilled. Daisy had moved. She was at one of the side tables now, her back to the wall, holding a cup of wine she had not drunk. Petra was beside her, talking, and Daisy was listening with the attentive patience of someone who loves the person speaking and is also existing on 2 separate levels simultaneously, present in the conversation, present also in a quieter internal space where things were still settling. She was not watching Sebastian. That was the thing that had caught his attention initially, in the corridor. Not that she had looked at him, but the quality of the looking. No performance in it, no adjustment of posture or expression for his benefit. She had looked at him the way she might look at a storm coming in from the north, with clear-eyed attention, neither running from it nor pretending it wasn't there. And then she had simply turned away, not dismissively, just finished looking, for now. Sebastian had been looked at in every possible way. He had been studied, assessed, desired, feared, flattered, and occasionally challenged. He could not remember the last time someone had looked at him and then simply stopped because they had seen what they needed to see. He pushed off the wall. Dorian straightened immediately. "Are you?" "Stay here," Sebastian said. "That is not a thing I am capable of doing when something interesting is happening." Dorian. The single word, flat and final. Dorian stayed. Rael watched Sebastian cross the hall with the quiet attention of someone cataloging information. He said nothing. He rarely did. The hall was full enough that Sebastian's movement toward the side tables was not immediately obvious. Or rather, it was obvious to everyone, but appeared invisible, because nobody wanted to be caught watching the Alpha King walk somewhere with that particular quality of intention. Daisy saw him coming when he was still several feet away. She did not straighten, did not adjust, did not look to Petra for support or guidance. She simply shifted her gaze from the middle distance to him, with the same clear, unhurried attention she had offered in the corridor, and waited. He stopped at a distance that was respectful without being remote. For a moment he said nothing. He looked at her the way she had looked at him earlier, with the patience of someone who is not performing calm, but actually has it, who has enough internal stillness to fill a silence without being threatened by it. "You stayed," he said finally. His voice was quiet, meant only for her. Daisy considered the words before answering, because that was how she approached most things. Not cautiously exactly, but thoughtfully, with the instinct that the first words that came to mind were usually the ones most worth examining before releasing them. "I didn't want to let one bad moment define the whole evening," she said. Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise. Something more considered than that. "That's an unusual way to look at it," he said. "Is it? Most people, after what happened to you tonight, would have left." He paused. "Or stayed to make sure they were seen not leaving. You did neither." Daisy looked at him steadily. "You don't know what happened to me tonight." "No," he agreed. "I know what I observed. There's a difference." She was quiet for a moment. Beside her, Petra had gone completely still in the way of someone who has stopped breathing in order to hear better. "You observed correctly," Daisy said finally. "But it doesn't matter now." "Why not?" "Because it's done." She said it simply, without drama, without the brittleness of someone performing acceptance. He made his choice. It wasn't me. That's information, not a wound. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. "That's a very composed thing to say," he said, and his voice had shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, but carrying something different in it now. Something that had not been there when he had spoken to Elder Rowan. Something that was not the Alpha King speaking to a subject, but something considerably more direct than that. "I'm a composed person," Daisy said. "I noticed. You've been watching me." "Yes." She had expected deflection. The directness surprised her, not because she hadn't anticipated intelligence in him, but because honesty of that quality was rare in a room full of people performing their best versions of themselves. "Why?" she asked. He tilted his head very slightly, the way someone does when a question is more interesting than they expected it to be. "Because every woman in this hall has been trying to catch my attention since I walked in," he said, "and you haven't looked at me once since the corridor." Daisy considered this. Then, for the first time since she had watched Caden speak another woman's name from the dais, something shifted in her expression. small and genuine, not manufactured for effect. The beginning of a smile, not the full thing, just the edge of it, at the corner of her mouth, like the first light before an actual sunrise. Sebastian went very still, and Daisy, who did not yet understand what that stillness meant, simply held his gaze and let the almost smile exist without apology. The almost smile did not last long. Daisy was too careful for that, too practiced in the art of not giving too much away to people she did not yet know. She let it exist for exactly as long as it was honest, and then she let it settle back into the composed expression that was her natural resting place. The one she had worn for so long it fit like a second skin, but Sebastian had seen it, and something in the way he stood, that absolute, unhurried stillness, told her that he was not a man who forgot things easily. Petra made a small sound beside her that was technically a cough, but was transparently nothing of the sort. Daisy did not look at her. She kept her eyes on Sebastian with the same calm attention she had been offering since the corridor, because looking away now would feel like a retreat, and she had done enough retreating for one evening. "I don't know your name," Sebastian said. "Daisy." She offered it without ceremony. No pack name to attach, no lineage to announce, no title to soften or complicate the introduction. Just the name her mother had given her, plain and unadorned. He repeated it once, quietly, as if he were placing it somewhere specific. "Daisy." "And I know yours," she said. "Sebastian Vying, Alpha King of the Northern Realm." "Does that change how you're speaking to me?" She thought about it honestly, which he seemed to notice. The pause that indicated actual consideration rather than performance. "No," she said. "Should it?" Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The shadow of the possibility of one. "Most people think so," he said. "Most people are managing an impression," Daisy replied. "I don't have enough standing here to bother with impressions. I can only afford to be accurate." This time the movement at his mouth was more definite. Still not a full smile, but something real. Something that hadn't been there a moment ago. He looked at her the way someone looks at a lock they've been turning in their hand for some time and have just felt give. From across the hall, Dorian was watching with undisguised delight. Rael stood beside him with his arms crossed, expression unreadable, but his eyes had not left Sebastian and the woman in the wheat-colored dress since Sebastian had crossed the room. "He's smiling," Dorian said quietly. "The corner of his mouth moved," Rael replied. "For him, that's a smile. That's practically dancing." Dorian shook his head slowly. "Who is she?" No pack name. No obvious rank. Rael's eyes were sharp and assessing, but her scent carries something I haven't smelled in a long time. Dorian glanced at him. "What do you mean?" "Old blood," Rael said simply, "the kind that doesn't announce itself." Dorian looked back across the hall at the young woman in the wheat dress standing before their Alpha King with her hands folded and her chin level, and he was quiet for a moment, in the particular way he went quiet when something shifted from entertaining to significant. "Does she know?" he asked. "No," Rael said. "I don't think she knows anything about herself except what this pack has told her. And this pack," he added, with a glance toward the dais where Caden and his claimed mate were receiving congratulations, "has told her very little worth knowing." At the side table, Sebastian was asking Daisy a question she had not expected. "How long have you been in Ashford?" "All my life," she said. "My mother settled here before I was born. We were never formally pack-bonded. We just lived at the edges." "And your father?" "Gone before I could know him." She said it without self-pity, the way you state a fact about the weather. "My mother raised me alone. She died 4 years ago." Sebastian absorbed this. "So you have no one here who is bound to you." It was not a cruel observation. It was precise in the way that accurate things sometimes feel uncomfortable. Not because they are unkind, but because they are simply true, and you have spent time not saying them aloud. "I have Petra," Daisy said, with a small nod toward her friend, who was very transparently pretending to examine the grain of the wooden table. "She's been my family since we were children." "One person," Sebastian said. "One good person," Daisy replied, "is worth considerably more than a room full of indifferent ones." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." There was something in the way he said it, not agreement for the sake of conversation, but the recognition of someone who has learned the same thing through a different road, at a different cost. Before either of them could continue, the hall shifted. Daisy felt it before she heard it. A change in the quality of the air, the kind that comes when a room full of wolves collectively orients toward something. She turned slightly and saw Elder Rowan moving through the crowd toward them with the deliberate calm of a man who has decided to address something before it addresses itself. He stopped at a respectful distance from Sebastian and inclined his head. "Alpha King, I hope the evening has been acceptable." A pause waited with careful diplomacy. "I wonder if I might ask the purpose of your visit to Ashford, so that we may offer you appropriate hospitality." Sebastian turned from Daisy with the unhurried ease of a man who had not been interrupted, but had simply chosen to redirect his attention. "We're traveling north," he said. "We stopped for the night. Your hall was lit, and the gate was open." Elder Rowan processed this. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation, and also clearly not the complete one. But you did not press the Alpha King for the complete explanation. You accepted what was offered and remained grateful for it. "Of course. We are honored. Rooms will be prepared. That won't be necessary." Sebastian's eyes moved briefly back to Daisy, a single, unhurried glance, before returning to the elder. "We leave before dawn." Elder Rowan nodded and withdrew with relief barely concealed beneath dignity. Caden had watched the entire exchange from across the hall. He was not a stupid man. He understood rank and he understood attention, and he had spent the last several minutes watching the Alpha King of the Northern Realm stand at a side table, having a quiet conversation with Daisy. Daisy, who had no pack name, no standing, no claim to anything in Ashford, with the focused attention of someone who was not making small talk. He said something low to his newly claimed mate, who followed his gaze and then looked away with the instinctive discretion of someone who has just realized that the political landscape of the evening is more complicated than it appeared. Caden crossed the hall. Daisy saw him coming and felt something shift in her chest. Not pain exactly, not anymore. Something colder and more solid than pain. The recognition of a pattern completing itself. He stopped near the table, his eyes moving between her and Sebastian with an expression that was trying very hard to be casual and not quite managing it. Daisy. He used her name with the particular familiarity of someone asserting a connection that no longer exists. "I didn't realize you were still here." "Clearly," she said. A small silence. Caden's eyes moved to Sebastian, and something shifted in his expression. The recalibration of a man who has just understood that the person he dismissed is standing next to someone he cannot dismiss. Alpha King. He inclined his head with the deep, careful respect of a lower wolf acknowledging hierarchy. "I'm Caden, son of Elder Rowan. Welcome to Ashford Hall." "I know who you are," Sebastian said. 3 words, even and quiet, carrying no particular judgment. Somehow that was worse than judgment would have been. Caden absorbed it. He looked at Daisy once more, and in that look was something she recognized, something she might have found satisfying if she had been a different kind of person. The beginning of understanding. The first edge of the knowledge that he had made a calculation tonight that was going to cost him something, though he did not yet know exactly what. "I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening," Caden said to both of them, and withdrew. Daisy watched him go. He chose someone else tonight, Sebastian said beside her. It was not a question. Yes. And you came anyway, because he had asked you to. Yes. A pause. He's a fool, Sebastian said. Daisy turned to look at him. He was not looking at her with sympathy, that particular softening that people offered when they wanted her to feel better. He was looking at her with the straightforward assessment of someone making an accurate observation about something that was simply, factually true. Maybe, she said. Or maybe he made the choice that was best for his position. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She was quiet for a moment. Then, despite everything, the evening, the cold corridor, the 3 weeks of candlelight and golden thread, she felt it again. That small, ungovernable shift at the corner of her mouth. Sebastian saw it. This time, it was closer to the full thing. Not quite there, but close enough that the difference was only a matter of distance, and not much distance at that. He was quiet for a long moment, watching her with that expression she still could not fully name. "Walk with me," he said. It was not a command. That was the thing. He was the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf within 3 territories, a man accustomed to being obeyed as a matter of course. And he had looked at her and said it the way you say something to an equal, a request that acknowledged she could say no. Daisy looked at him for a moment. Then she set down the cup of wine she had never drunk, pushed off the wall, and walked beside him toward the far end of the hall, where the great stone archway opened onto the outer corridor, and the cool night air carried the smell of pine and rain and dark earth. Behind her, Petra pressed both hands over her mouth. Across the hall, Dorian turned to Rael with an expression of pure, uncomplicated joy. Rael simply nodded once, slowly, as if something he had suspected for a long time had just been confirmed. And Caden, standing at the edge of the dais with his claimed mate's hand in his, watched Daisy walk away beside the Alpha King, and understood, fully, finally, and too late, exactly what he had let go. The outer corridor was long and cold and quiet. Stone walls on both sides, torches set far apart so the light came in intervals. Amber, shadow, amber, shadow. And between the torches, the darkness was deep and genuine, the kind that existed before anyone thought to push it back. The sound of the hall faded quickly behind them, muffled by thick walls and distance, until it became something felt more than heard, a low vibration in the stone beneath their feet. Daisy walked beside Sebastian and did not fill the silence. That was something she had learned young. That silence was not a problem requiring solution. Her mother had been a quiet woman, comfortable in the spaces between words, and Daisy had inherited that ease the way she had inherited the pattern of the wolf flower and the careful steadiness of her hands. She walked, and she breathed, and she let the night air settle around her, cool and clean after the warmth and weight of the hall. Sebastian walked the way he did everything, without hurry, without performance, with the particular quality of presence that made the space around him feel occupied, in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. They had gone perhaps 30 paces before he spoke. "You're not going to ask me why I wanted to walk with you," he said. "No," Daisy agreed. "Why not?" She considered the corridor ahead of them. "Because you'll tell me when you're ready, or you won't. Either way, asking won't change it." A pause. Most people would ask. "Most people are more anxious than I am," she said simply. He looked at her from the side. She felt it rather than saw it, that quality of focused attention turning in her direction. "Are you not anxious?" "I didn't say that." She kept her eyes forward. "I said I'm not more anxious than the patience required to wait." The corridor opened ahead onto a covered archway that faced the eastern grounds. A stone balcony of sorts, framed by 2 carved wolf heads, worn smooth by generations of weather, overlooking a courtyard where the torches had mostly guttered, and the sky above was thick with clouds that moved quickly across a pale moon. The smell of rain was stronger here, and pine, and beneath both of those something wilder and colder that came from the dark tree line at the edge of the grounds. Sebastian stopped at the archway and looked out. Daisy stopped beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the courtyard below and lifted the edge of her wheat-colored dress and carried his scent toward her again. Pine, iron, dark earth, and that deeper thing underneath that she still had no name for, the frequency in the bones thing that had stopped her feet in the corridor when he first arrived. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly, not diplomatically." "I'm not very diplomatic to begin with," Daisy said. "Good." He turned slightly toward her. In the pale moonlight filtering through the moving clouds, his face was all clean lines and shadow, the dark braids falling across one shoulder, his eyes carrying that same quality of gathered light she had noticed across the hall. "How long have you been in Ashford without belonging to it?" The question landed differently than she expected. Not the surface layer. She had heard variations of that her whole life. The subtle and not so subtle reminders of her borderless position. But the way he asked it, not with pity, not with the careful kindness of someone trying not to wound, with the directness of someone who already understands the answer and is asking anyway because he wants to hear how she carries it. "Always," she said. "We were never pack-bonded. My mother chose not to seek formal membership, and after she died, I stayed, because it was the only place I knew. But belonging?" She paused, looking for the accurate word. "No, not that." "Did it hurt?" "In the beginning," she said. "Less now. You learn to build your own interior walls. Make the inside large enough that the outside matters less." Sebastian was quiet for a moment. He looked back out at the courtyard. "I know something about that," he said. She looked at him. It was an unexpected thing for the Alpha King of the Northern Realm to say, a man surrounded at all times by wolves who deferred to him, who commanded 4 territories, whose name alone rearranged the atmosphere of every room he entered. "You?" she said, and there was no mockery in it, only genuine inquiry. "Power and belonging are not the same thing," he said. "I learned that early." A pause. "My mother was from a secondary line. She married my father, the previous Alpha King, against the preference of his council. She was considered inadequate for the position, insufficiently noble, wrong bloodline." His jaw moved slightly. "She died when I was 11. By then she had spent a decade being technically present in every room and genuinely welcome in none of them." Daisy was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said. "It was a long time ago." He said it the same way she had said things earlier, not dismissively, but with the calm of someone who has processed a grief fully enough that they can hold it without being held by it. "But I recognize the particular quality of existing at the edges of a place. The way you learn to take up exactly the right amount of space. Not too much, not too little." "Yes," Daisy said softly. "Exactly that." He turned to look at her fully then, and she turned to look at him. And they stood in the archway with the cold wind moving between them and the moonlight coming and going through the racing clouds. And there was something in that moment that felt less like 2 people who had met 2 hours ago, and more like 2 people who had been speaking the same private language for years, and had only just found someone else who knew the words. "Rael told me something earlier," Sebastian said. His voice had shifted slightly, still quiet, but with a different quality of care in it, the kind of care that precedes something significant. "About your scent." Daisy frowned slightly. "My scent?" "Rael has a gift," Sebastian said. "He reads bloodlines through scent. It's rare. There are perhaps 3 wolves in the Northern Realm with the ability, and he's the strongest of them." A pause. He said yours carries old blood, the kind that doesn't announce itself. She was quiet for a moment, processing this. I don't know my father's lineage, she said carefully. My mother never spoke of it. She said it was a complicated history, and that I was better served by being simply myself than by carrying a name I hadn't earned. A wise woman, Sebastian said. She was. Daisy looked at her hands for a moment. The hands that had sewn a wolf flower in golden thread by candlelight, the hands that had learned a healer's work from a mother who knew more than she had ever said aloud. What did Rael think the bloodline was? Sebastian looked at her steadily. Aurelian. The word landed in the space between them and sat there. Daisy knew the name. Everyone in the wolf world knew the name, the way you knew the names of things that had passed into legend. Present in the oldest songs, in the ceremonial words spoken at formal gatherings, in the histories that pack elders recited to children on winter nights. The Aurelian line. The founding bloodline of the Northern Realm. The wolves who had built the first great packs before the territories had been divided and named, who had carried a particular gift for leadership so deep it existed at the cellular level, passed down and down through generations until, according to most accounts, it had finally extinguished itself 3 generations back when the last known Aurelian heir had disappeared without issue. That's not possible, Daisy said. Her voice was even, but something had shifted underneath it. Rael has never been wrong, Sebastian said. I'm a woman with no pack name who sews her own dresses and has spent her whole life being invisible in a hall full of wolves who didn't think she was worth looking at. She looked at him directly. The Aurelian bloodline is old blood that doesn't announce itself, Sebastian said quietly. Those were his exact words. Daisy was silent. The wind moved through the archway and the clouds shifted overhead, and the moonlight came through cleanly for a moment, falling across the courtyard below and across the carved wolf heads on either side of them, and across the wheat-colored dress, with the small wolf flower at the hem that no one at the celebration had noticed. Almost no one. My mother's pattern, Daisy said slowly. The wolf flower. The specific shape of it. The way the petals curved into points that she had always thought were stylized, decorative. But now, standing here with the moonlight falling and Sebastian's words settling into her, she thought about the careful way her mother had taught her. Not just the stitch, but the exact configuration of it, the specific number of petals, the direction of the curves. As if precision mattered. As if it was not decoration but something else entirely. She was very specific about the pattern. I thought it was just sentiment. What does it look like? Sebastian asked. Daisy looked down at her hem. In the moonlight, the golden thread caught the pale light and gleamed. Sebastian followed her gaze. He was still for a long moment. Then he reached into the collar of his leather armor and drew out a small medallion on a dark cord. Something he wore against his skin. Something private. He held it toward her in the moonlight. On the face of the medallion was a seal. A wolf surrounded by flower-pointed rays, each petal curving in a specific direction. The exact pattern her mother had taught her. Daisy stared at it. Her hands were completely still. Her breathing was even. But something behind her eyes had changed. Something that was not quite shock, because shock implies the unprepared mind. And some part of Daisy, some deep and quiet part that had always known she was something other than what Ashford had told her she was, felt instead the particular sensation of a door opening that had always been there, that she had simply never had the key to find. This is the Aurelian seal, Sebastian said quietly. It has not been publicly recorded in 3 generations. He paused. Your mother knew exactly what she was giving you. Daisy looked up at him. She was protecting me, Daisy said. The certainty of it arrived fully formed, the way true things sometimes do. She hid it. She kept me borderless, nameless, invisible. because visible would have been dangerous. Yes, Sebastian said. It would have been. They looked at each other in the archway with the wind moving cold between them and the medallion catching moonlight in his hand and the wolf flower gleaming at her hem, and Daisy felt the interior walls she had built so carefully over so many years not crumbling. She was not a woman whose walls crumbled, but shifting, rearranging themselves around a new understanding of what they had actually been protecting. Not smallness. Something that had needed time to be ready. Sebastian closed his hand around the medallion and let it fall back against his chest. He looked at her with that expression she had been trying to name since the corridor. The one that was not pity or curiosity or desire exactly, but contained elements of all three, organized around something she could now identify. Recognition. He had known, or suspected, before he crossed the hall. Rael had told him. But recognition was not the same as proof, and proof was not the same as the thing itself standing before you in a wheat-colored dress with steady hands and a composed face and an almost smile that arrived only when it was completely honest. "What happens now?" Daisy asked. It was the first time all evening that she had asked a question about the future rather than addressing the present, and Sebastian seemed to understand the weight of it. "That depends on you," he said. And then, with the same quality of honesty he had been offering her all evening, direct, undecorated, acknowledging her ability to choose. "But I would like to show you what the Northern Realm looks like, and I would like you to meet my council." A pause. "And I would like to keep talking to you." Daisy looked at him for a long moment. The almost smile arrived again. Closer this time. Warmer. "You leave before dawn," she said. "Yes." "That doesn't leave much time." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." She looked out at the courtyard, at the dark tree line beyond the walls, at the clouds moving fast across the moon. Then she looked back at him. "Then we shouldn't waste it," she said. They talked until the torches in the corridor burned low. Not about bloodlines or seals, or the weight of ancient names. Those things had been said, and had settled into the space between them, like stones finding the bottom of still water, present and solid, but no longer needing to be examined. They talked about smaller things, the kind of things that reveal more than grand declarations ever do. Sebastian asked her about her mother's healing work, and listened with genuine attention when she described the specific way her mother had organized her herbs, by function rather than name, because she believed the body responded to intention more than taxonomy. Daisy asked him about the Northern Realm, and he described it without ceremony. The way someone describes a place they actually know, rather than a territory they administrate. The quality of light in the mountain passes in early winter. The way the 4 packs had their own particular rhythms that took years to understand. The library in the central keep that contained records going back further than anyone had bothered to read. She had not expected him to mention the library. "You read?" she said. "Constantly," he said, and there was something almost self-deprecating in it. Not apology, but the acknowledgement of something private made briefly visible. "What do you read?" "History, mostly. Old accounts. Things written before anyone had reason to manage the impression they were leaving." A pause. "Honest records are rare. I collect them." Daisy thought about her mother's careful teaching, the precision of the wolf flower pattern, the years of deliberate obscurity. An honest record hidden in plain sight, stitched into the hem of a dress. "My mother kept a journal," she said slowly. "I have it. I've read it many times, but there are passages I always thought were metaphorical. She wrote in a layered way. Some of it I understood immediately. Some of it I think I was supposed to come back to later." Sebastian looked at her. "When did she give it to you?" "She didn't. I found it after she died, in the lining of her healer's bag." Daisy paused. "Hidden." The word sat between them with the weight it deserved. "I would like to read it someday," Sebastian said. With your permission. Someday, Daisy said, and the word carried its own particular meaning. Not a deflection, but an acknowledgement that someday was now a concept that had content, that it referred to a future that contained him in it, which was a thing that had not been true 4 hours ago. Dorian found them at the archway near the second bell of night. He had the grace to look slightly apologetic, which for Dorian was a significant departure from his natural register. "The horses are being readied," he said. "Rail says the weather window closes by the third bell." Sebastian nodded once. Dorian looked at Daisy with open curiosity and the remnants of the delight he had been carrying all evening. "You're Daisy," he said. "Yes," she said. "I'm Dorian. I've known Sebastian since we were 8 years old, and I have never once seen him cross a room like that." He said it with complete sincerity, dressed in lightness, which she was beginning to understand was his particular mode. "I thought you should know that." "Dorian," Sebastian said. "I'm going," Dorian said, already retreating. "Horses, third bell. Understood." He disappeared back down the corridor with the energy of someone who has delivered exactly the message he intended and is satisfied with the results. Daisy looked at Sebastian. He was looking at her with the expression she had finally named, recognition, and beneath it something that had grown over the course of the evening, something warmer and more specific, something that had moved from observation to decision. "Come north," he said, not a command, the same quality as walk with me, a request that saw her clearly enough to know she was capable of saying no, and offered itself anyway. Daisy was quiet. She thought about Ashford Hall, the edges of it, the careful invisible space she had inhabited for 23 years, the table where she refilled wine cups, the corridor she had been walking down alone when the night rearranged itself. She thought about Caden, who was inside right now with his claimed mate and his elder father, and his position that had never actually included her. She thought about the wolf flower on her hem, and her mother's hands moving precisely over the same pattern, and a journal hidden in the lining of a healer's bag. She thought about the library in a keep in the northern realm, full of honest records that went back further than anyone had bothered to read. "I need to get Petra," she said. Something in Sebastian's expression shifted, a warmth that he did not try to contain. "Of course," he said. Petra cried. Not sadly, the overwhelmed kind of crying that happens when something so far outside the expected range of an evening occurs that the emotional system simply exceeds its own capacity. She cried and laughed at the same time, and held Daisy's face in both hands and said, I always knew there was something about you that this place was too small for," and then cried some more while simultaneously beginning to think about what to pack. "You don't have to come," Daisy said. "Daisy." Petra looked at her with absolute clarity through the tears. "You are my family. Where you go, I go. That is not a discussion." Daisy held her tightly for a moment, her composed face pressed against her best friend's dark curls, and allowed herself, just briefly, just in this private space before the next thing began, to feel the full weight of the evening. The hurt of the early hours and the impossible turn of the later ones, and the strange, unsteady, genuine feeling of standing on the edge of something real. Then she straightened, smoothed her wheat-colored dress, and began to pack the few things that mattered. The journal was the first thing she placed in the bag. Then her mother's small healer's kit, the bone-handled knife that had been her father's, and that her mother had kept without explanation, and the spare dress that was less fine than the wheat one but warmer. She looked around the small room she had lived in for 4 years, borrowed space at the edge of a pack that had never fully claimed her, and felt no grief for leaving it. Only the clean sensation of a door closing on something that had already ended. They left before dawn, as Sebastian had said. 6 horses in the pre-dawn dark, the courtyard lit by 2 torches guttering in the cold wind, the tree line black against a sky that was beginning to consider the possibility of light somewhere far to the east. Rael had arranged everything with the quiet efficiency that appeared to be his natural mode. Dorian had somehow obtained a traveling cloak for both Daisy and Petra without being asked, which told Daisy something about the kind of attention he paid beneath the performance of not paying attention. Sebastian helped her mount with a steadiness that was practical, and also, she noticed, careful, the hands of someone who understood the difference between assistance and presumption, and had chosen the former. As they rode through the gates of Ashford, Daisy did not look back. Not out of bitterness. Not as a gesture. She simply did not need to. Everything behind those walls had already been accounted for, closed properly, given its true value, and released. She looked forward, at the road north, at the dark trees opening on either side, and the smell of pine thickening as they climbed away from the valley. Sebastian rode beside her. They did not speak for a while. The horses moved at an easy pace, and the pre-dawn air was cold and clean, and the sky above the tree line was beginning its slow conversation, with morning, dark blue softening at the edges toward something less absolute. "Are you afraid?" Sebastian asked. Daisy considered the road ahead, the darkness and the coming light. "No," she said. And then, because she was an accurate person, "A little. But not of the going. Only of whether I'm ready for what the going leads to." "You are," he said. She looked at him. "You can't know that." "I've spent 20 years reading honest records," he said. "I know what I'm looking at." The almost smile arrived, and this time, finally, completely, it became the real thing. Full and unhurried and entirely honest, the way her smiles were when they came. Warm and genuine, and lit from somewhere interior that had nothing to do with performance. Sebastian looked at her in the gray pre-dawn light and went completely, utterly still, in the way he had gone still each time before, except that this time it lasted longer and was deeper and had something in it that was no longer just the beginning of something, but the thing itself, clear and decided. He did not look away. Neither did she. They reached the northern realm 6 days later. The keep was exactly as he had described it. Stone and age, and the particular gravity of a place that had been the center of something important for a very long time. The council received her with the careful assessment of people who do not offer welcome before they have determined whether it is warranted, and Daisy stood before them with her hands folded, and her chin level, and her composed face, and answered their questions without deflection and without performance, and by the end of the first hour, 3 of the 7 had stopped assessing and started listening. Rael presented his findings on her bloodline formally, with the precision of a scholar and the brevity of a man who has no interest in theater. The Aurelian heritage was documented, cross-referenced against the old records in the library, confirmed by 2 independent sources in the oldest texts. The council absorbed it in the particular silence of people recalibrating. Her mother's journal, when Sebastian read it, with her beside him, both of them in the library among the honest records, a fire burning low in the grate, revealed everything. Her mother had known, had always known, had made the choice to protect her daughter over preserving her own legacy, had hidden her in plain sight in a borderless existence at the edge of an unremarkable pack, had given her the pattern and the journal and the bone-handled knife, and trusted that the right moment would find her when she was ready. Daisy read the final passage of the journal and sat with it for a long time without speaking. Sebastian sat beside her and did not rush her. That was the thing, she thought. The thing that was different from everything she had known before. He never rushed her, never performed patience while actually waiting for her to arrive at the conclusion he had already reached. He simply existed beside her, fully present, and allowed her the space of her own processing. "She would have liked you," Daisy said finally. "I hope to have deserved that," he said. She looked at him in the firelight. This man who had crossed a hall full of wolves performing their finest selves, and walked directly to the one person not performing anything, who had stood in an archway and spoken to her as an equal before he knew who she was, who had a medallion worn against his skin, and a library full of honest records, and a stillness that came from actual depth rather than practiced reserve. "You do," she said. Caden married Seraphine of Dawnridge Pack that winter, as planned. The alliance served its political purpose. He was, by all accounts, a capable leader of Ashford in the years that followed, measured, fair, competent. He did not speak of Daisy openly, but those who knew him well observed that he had a particular way of going quiet sometimes, when news came from the Northern Realm, when the name of the Alpha King's chosen mate was mentioned in council or correspondence. The quiet of a man who understands, with full clarity, what a particular kind of blindness costs. Petra became one of the most valued members of the Northern Realm's healer corps within 2 years. Her natural gift for people and her deep knowledge of her best friend's heritage, making her indispensable in ways she had never been allowed to be in Ashford. She told Daisy repeatedly and with great satisfaction, exactly where she was supposed to be. Daisy took her place at Sebastian's side, not as a rescued woman or a reclaimed bloodline, but as herself, the composed, clear-eyed, accurate woman who had walked out of a breaking moment with her head level and her wolf flower gleaming at her hem, who had built interior walls large enough to survive invisibility, and then, when the time came, had been ready to walk through an archway into something larger. The Northern Realm learned her name the way it learned all true things, gradually, then completely. And Sebastian, who had spent 20 years reading honest records, and had known from the first moment in a torchlit corridor what he was looking at, kept the Aurelian medallion against his skin and watched her smile, her real smile, the full, honest one, and understood that he had not found something unexpected. He had simply, finally, found what he had been waiting for.